Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel. I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian, and thank you for joining us as we continue our exploration of the 5 eras, the alternate timeline. And I'd like to extend a great warm welcome to all Prime Explorers, viewers, and all others joining us. The intention behind this exploration is I'd received several requests to give my idea in terms of how much time I think may have passed in each era. Now, there's a little bit of a pre-note, or at least a precursor note, I want everybody to be aware of. This is all entirely speculation, and we'll talk about why it is, especially as we go further back in time. And that's an honest assessment for me. The further you go back in time, the more difficult it becomes to really know exactly what the specific events were, to include the sequence and the chronology. And if anybody tells you otherwise, then it's a confidence trick. But let's really talk about that. Let's talk about time and perception to get started. Now, does anybody know what we're looking at here in this initial image? Does anybody know where this is? I have a feeling somebody knows what we're looking at. And yes, this has been explored before on the channel. Come on now. I know you want to say it. Kitch, KC, come on. All right. Well, it is the Liberty Memorial in Kansas City, Kansas, and it has been explored before. Now, the interesting thing about the Liberty Memorial, yeah, there you go, Casey. There you go. Liberty Memorial, Liberty Tower. Interestingly enough, constructed in the 1920s, thanks to donations collected from the good people of Kansas City to memorialize the dead of World War I. That's what its stated intention is, and we have some confidence that it was constructed or completed in the 1920s. Although, do we? It has some rather interesting symbols with it, such as what may be sphinxes or maybe something else. I don't know. Lions, griffins, whatever you think they may be. You also have the tower itself, which has these very intriguing guardian figures on them, which have absolutely nothing to do with World War I, but that's all right. Maybe they were just diving into the symbolism, and that's all good and well. You also have the fact that below it, in this subterranean complex here, is the actual World War I museum. And then beyond it, you have Union Station, the incredible train station that was constructed earlier in the early 19-teens in Kansas City. All the exceptional Art Deco buildings that still survive to this day. And then behind it here, you have this unnamed building, which we're not going to talk about. Although I will say it was implied that Snake Plissken was in that building in the deleted scene from Escape from New York. Because remember, he started in Kansas City. Anyways, so a lot of significance behind this, but what are we really getting at? Well, we're informed that it was constructed in 1920. And here is the image of the great heroes of World War I, all the great generals, although quite interesting in contrast to what we have in modern military affairs. The American general, John J. Pershing, is actually standing in the back, but maybe he was a little bit more of a modest character at that time. But yes, all the talk about World War I, and isn't this interesting, this symbolism that we have? Why do we keep seeing this everywhere? I don't know what it means, and I'm not going to speculate right now because we're talking about 5 eras. And we're talking about how confident we are that this monument was truly constructed in the 1920s, as we were informed. And that's why we've explored it many times. And we do have construction photos. I like how they just wrote on marker here. It looks like a Sharpie. You ever hear actor Peter Weller complain about Sharpies when he's signing autographs? It's really hilarious. March 19th, 1925. Now, what are your thoughts on this very interesting construction photo from 1925? And keep in mind, this is not even 100 years ago. This is 99 years ago. How confident are you in this photo? How confident that what you're seeing in this image is what's really happening at the time stated? And keep in mind, if this date was not Sharpied here on this photo, and remember, you're not looking at the original photo, and remember that the photo is just a photo. It is not the actual object itself at that time. I think that's something we forget. Even if you have a hard copy of the photo in your hand, it is not the actual object in that time. It is a representation of it. Now, of course, we'll take this to its logical conclusion. You are looking at a digital projection of that image that has been copied, and it's a copy of a copy of a copy. In other words, it's not authentic. It's not the authentic object. But based on what you see, the representation, what are your thoughts? How confident are you? Oh, there you go. I am Kairos. Yeah, it does look cropped, doesn't it? Just a tad bit. The guy on the right favors John Wayne. Yeah, good one, Sissy May. Ooh, looks stripped down. Yes. Oh, there's a good question there from Vaughn. Did our civilization even take this photo? Who knows? Or is this an actual genuine photo? Again, who knows? We're just asking questions. And you're giving your impressions about what you see. Robert says looks like a cut and paste. Yeah, maybe. Who knows for sure? And remember, we're just looking at one photo. And you might recall in early channel explorations, one of the things that we emphasized is how many of these photos do we have where they just hand jam the date on them? I mean, for all we know, that could have been Peter Weller that actually wrote that date on there. I'm not saying it is. It's just kind of funny to think about it, especially with his Sharpie problems. But you look at some of the detail, and I mean, you can explain it away. You can say, well, it wasn't a very good photo. It wasn't taken with a very good camera. Not really sure about the tower, but it's still one of the most significant, if not the most significant landmarks in Kansas City, depending on your perception. But then you look at this other photo from a date presumably earlier when they were dedicating it, and you have the massive crowds of people turning out and the great celebratory fervor of the Allies after winning World War One, and to recognize all the unfortunate dead in the trenches of World War One. Although, oddly enough, when you look a little more closely at this photo, what exactly is going on back here? I mean, is this really the mound, the hill that they built this on? I mean, it looks like we've got the surrounding terrain of Kansas City, but is it? And I mean, is the photo even taken in Kansas City? According to the archive, it is. But those are the kind of questions that we ask. I mean, what do you think's really going on right here? Is this the actual layout of one of those buildings that we saw? Did they change something? Now, I'm not playing any deception games here. This is stated to have been a photo in Kansas City of that hill before they completed the tower. What are your thoughts on this? Yeah, maybe. Bunch of people coming in there real fast and not really having a lot of time to deal with it. And oddly enough, you see a lot of mass gatherings like that in cities across the US. Oh, yes, it was all part of the celebratory nature of ending the Great War. Of course, we won't talk about that other terrifying event that followed the Great War, but nobody was really supposed to. And you might find it odd to know that official historical circles didn't really talk about that terrible event. That whole thing that was inappropriately titled the Spanish influenza. Hey, New West Reset, good to see you. Hey, RB. Look at all those grown up orphans. Yeah, and it might be a case of that for all we know. Oh, look at Jamie there. Looks composited. You don't say. Good observation as always, Jamie. Yeah, there are some elements of this that look a little bizarre. But I didn't take the photo. I didn't develop it. I don't know for sure. But just remember that even if I did, unless I was actually there, I was a firsthand witness. And what? I want to ask you that question. How challenging is it to find somebody who was alive now in the early 1920s who would have a conscious memory of this event? How old would they be now, and how well could they even recall it? And remember, we're only talking a simple 100 years ago. The real point I'm getting at is not whether the Liberty Tower was constructed by our civilization or another, just simply the uncertainty that we already have about one single monument in one city that was only 100 years ago. Something that should be very easy to document. And a lot of people say, oh, it's very well documented. Yeah, it's written down. There's lots of stuff that's written down. There's all kinds of stuff written about the Roman Empire that's been repeated and rediscovered. You, oddly enough, have strange anomalies going on here when you look closely at the people. But that's just one object. Now, going down from the monument to Union Station, this is apparently a colorized photo of the early construction on it. But again, if they've colorized a black and white photo, then what's that allude to? That alludes to altering the original photo, doesn't it? Photo taken from a flying machine. That's a good one, City Lamp Duo. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe. Maybe it was more of those veterans of the Union Balloon Corps from the Civil War. Ah, look at that, KC933. Yeah, it does look old and dirty. And we know that that building certainly doesn't look old and dirty to this day now, does it? You're right, Marine. There is never a foundation image. I would love to see a foundation image of this building. Anyways, here's more of the original photo of it to give you an idea of its size and immensity. And this is a very large building, especially the roof to this day. Of course, it's now been turned into a shrine for the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know if it's still a shrine for the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm sure it is. But of course, they have these very intriguing looking cranes, and you'll never see the actual blocks of the columns or the pillars lifted into place or anything like that. I don't know. Maybe we've got something like that going on here. It's just always a bunch of rubble. It's really strange, but that tends to be what we see. And here you have an image. I think this is from the 1930s, judging by the automobiles, as Mr. Worf would say. But it appears as though it's been there for a while and they just needed to clean it up. And even looking at the skyline that you can see at Kansas City, most of the buildings are already there. Well, of course they were. It was after the Art Deco era. Didn't build much of the city after that. I mean, they did. Some of the buildings, Power and Light District and so forth. But, I'm not trying to hand wave anything. Now, the building appeared in this film. You may have seen this film or you may not have. It was a TV movie, 1983's The Day After, starring Jason Robards. Jason Robards is a very interesting individual. He was an actor. His father was an actor too, and they went by Jason Robards Sr. and Jason Robards Jr. Then his father passed away and he just went by Jason Robards. His grandfather was actually the manager of Teddy Roosevelt's 1912 presidential campaign in Michigan. Yeah, so obviously the Robards family was well connected. And I don't remember the name of the performer who portrayed his daughter, but she wasn't in the movie too much. He talked to her, and then we saw her trying to survive Kansas City. You might remember The Day After was one of the 3 major nuclear nightmare fear films that came out in the early 1980s. This one was directed by Nicholas Meyer, the very wondrous auteur, director-writer who composed Star Trek II and Star Trek VI. To this day, still considered by many Star Trek fans the best of the Star Trek movies. He's the one who, on a shoestring budget, managed to make this TV film that just utterly frightened people. And I remember these days. I remember people being frightened by this film. But Jason Robards is really the only big name star in it. Of course, Steve Guttenberg turns up, and then Jeff Eastman, the guy who played High School Superman, even though his voice was dubbed by Christopher Reeve. Don't bring it up in conventions. I don't blame him for being upset about it. But anyway, what's interesting about this is they're actually standing on the Liberty Memorial right in front of the tower. You can't see the tower, it's behind the camera. But it's funny to me that the concrete actually looks exactly the same. Now, keep in mind, this was filmed in 82, so we're talking something 42 years ago. And Union Station here in the background looks exactly the same. And of course, the skyline of Kansas City looks pretty much the same. So, I'm not suggesting anything about progress or anything like that. It's just something else that's interesting. Now, later in the film, after the 2 hydrogen bombs hit Kansas City, then we see Jason Robards return to try to find his family. Of course, they're all dead. And they superimposed an image of what we're informed was Hiroshima as part of the special effects. Although I'm not going to show the image again, but you actually see Jason Robards walking around what's left of Liberty Tower. They did a pretty good job factoring up the rubble, despite having a shoestring budget. Anyway, here's where things get really interesting concerning Mr. Jason Robards and why we're focused on him initially. So in 1991, and going on to this whole concept of not being confident in history, Jason Robards served in the United States Navy. In fact, he was in the United States Navy when the Pearl Harbor attack occurred. And he narrated this little exploration on it, or perhaps I should say documentary as they called it then, on Pearl Harbor. And it was called The American Experience, PBS Pearl Harbor, Surprise and Remembrance. You can look it up yourself, and at timestamp 5734. And I'm not going to show it here. I'd rather give credit to the content creator who actually went to the trouble of posting this because I had it on a VHS tape, but it was lost. And Jason Robards says the following. He says, I was there that Sunday aboard the USS Honolulu, Radio Man 3rd Class Jason Robards. So Jason Robards said that he was at Pearl Harbor and he was on the USS Honolulu. But yet there is a discrepancy with that because official military record from 1941 says that Jason Robards was actually serving under a task force under the command of Admiral Halsey. Halsey was commanding from the USS Enterprise, and the USS Honolulu, which the ship that Jason Robards said he was on, was in Pearl Harbor. It was not part of that task force because the Enterprise and the aircraft carriers were sent sailing west. This was the actual ship they said Jason Robards was on, USS Northampton. So, according to the official historical account, Jason Robards was not at Pearl Harbor. He was there in the aftermath when the Northampton and the Enterprise came back to Pearl Harbor, but they were not there when the surprise attack occurred. But yet, in the documentary, he clearly says he was aboard this ship, the USS Honolulu, Radio Man 3rd Class, Jason Robards. So what exactly happened? We're only talking about something that, from the time of this documentary, was 50 years earlier. Would Jason Robards not remember what ship he was actually on? Did he forget? Or did they just convince him when he did the documentary, hey, we want you to say that you were on the USS Honolulu, even though you were not? Would he have accepted that? Problem is, we can't ask Jason Robards. He passed away in 2000. So keep in mind here, we're not even talking about an event 100 years ago, and we can't even confirm what ship a famous actor was on. Jason Robards, in his own voice on that documentary, said he was on the USS Honolulu. But official sources, to include military.com, which, by the way, is not an official source. It's an independent media site, but it reports on U.S. military matters. They say he was on the Northampton. He wasn't at Pearl Harbor. Kind of a big deal, wouldn't you say? So if we can't even get confidence and total confidence in recent history, which within 100 years, within 80 years, which is quote unquote very well documented and very well tracked by the United States military, who is all about keeping records of all personnel. Indeed, they still have records of all 72,000 of the missing from World War II who are still unaccounted for to this day. You can look up their name, you can look up their hometown, you can look up what year they were missing. But we don't know what ship Jason Robards was on December 7th, 1941. How ironic that today is December 7th, 2024, right? So, thoughts on that? Yeah, exactly, Petty. Exactly. Ah, Robert telling a story. Yeah, and it is quite a story, isn't it? And so we don't even have confidence in a memorial. We don't have confidence that a famous actor during the most famous battle of World War II. Now, granted, there were many battles in World War II, but United States, let's remember Pearl Harbor. Come on. And they did all those documentaries on it in 1991, 50 years after the fact. He wouldn't have forgotten. Nobody forgets what ship they were on. But I don't know. It'd be interesting to be able to ask him. Who knows? Now, from that, I want to transition for time and perception. You might recall the time exploration we did, and I just want you to think about how many different calendars that we have. How many different chronologies do we have? Different societies, different cultures all across the land. And it seems like there are several significant calendars. There's also debate in terms of what year it actually is currently. We'll get to that in a second. Yes, the good old Julian calendar used by the aforementioned United States military to make sure that you're programming your radio properly and you're putting in the right Julian date, because if you don't, you'll have problems. But the Julian calendar was used for a long time, wasn't it? Or was it? Okinawa was just as bad, according to history. Yeah, no doubt about it. Jacob, standard procedure, lie about everything. Well, you bring that up. Let's just really talk about that real quick with military officers. Military officers are sworn to support and defend the Constitution and obey the orders of all officers appointed over them. Who's the commander-in-chief of the United States military? That would be the president. So military officers will not lie. And if they do lie and they get caught doing it, they'll be charged on the Uniform Code of Military Justice. However, if they are ordered to lie, then they're going to lie. Otherwise, if they don't lie as they're ordered to, they'll be charged on the Uniform Code of Military Justice for disobeying a lawful order from a superior officer. That's exactly how it works. And so if you really think about that, what does that really tell you that you can actually verify even from a very effective record-keeping organization or institution such as the United States military, who we acknowledge is the only military that does divide up all the known lands into areas of operation, or combatant commands as they call them. Yeah, nobody else does that. I am Kairos. Write new narrative for new population with a new calendar equals reset. Well, exactly. And if anybody's ever read the Timothy Zahn Heir to the Empire Star Wars books, and Luke Skywalker himself even talks about that, how whenever there's a new government in power, they even come up with a new calendar. There was the pre-imperial date, and now there's going to be the new republic date. And what was the name of the government in the Star Wars sequels? I don't know. They never talked about it. You had to read the books. Okay. Anyways, so all these different calendars that allude to a reset. And finally, we get to what we're really talking about, the 5 eras theory. So I came up with the 5 eras theory as a way, but not the only way, to try to see how the past may have happened. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the eras now for the rest of this exploration. We're going to talk about what we know, what we think we know, and then how long each of these eras may have been. And you can see how the 5 eras theory works. We're in our contemporary era. And yes, I leave the year 2023 up here because, that's when the channel started and that's when I started doing explorations. Although, interestingly enough, I'm getting more people in comments who are saying they've been following me for years. So I don't know. Are these people who knew me personally and now they're on the channel? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'm thankful for everybody who wants to show up and support us. It's all good. But anyways, 2023, whatever the present actually is, the contemporary era, all of our events that have happened, the history that we've just been talking about. We do a lot of our explorations in the contemporary era. If not, well, technically we do all of them, but most of our focus is here because we're looking at any remnants that we have. Now, what's the break between the contemporary era and the fourth era, or the Tartarian era, as we call it? Remember, that's just a term of respect. We don't know what the previous civilization was called. Can also call it the Monument Civilization or the Dome Civilization, whatever. When was that break? Was it in the year 1850? Was it 1800? Was it 1750? Did those years even happen? Because remember, I can't go and talk to Jason Robards' grandfather or even Jason Robards' father, he passed away in the 1960s, to confirm that there was firsthand accounts of even 1899. Now, yes, there's video footage of people talking about the 1800s. And oddly enough, you might remember Jason Robards voiced General Grant on Ken Burns' The Civil War. He also played several other presidents, very interestingly enough. Oh, and in the 1990s, he was in one of those 80-minute long HBO movies called The Enemy Within, about a coup within the United States military. Yeah, crazy things they had in those movies back then, 86 minutes long. But we're going to go and we're going to look at the rest of these eras, and we're also going to talk about what we call the foundation eras. And why do you think the foundation eras are more difficult to talk about than even the Tartarian era or the fourth era? What's the challenges that we run across? Chassis, since 2020 time has been an illusion. Yeah, well, who knows if it wasn't an illusion for much longer than that, wouldn't you say? But yeah, it's a good point. Uh-oh. Dwayne knew me in the womb. Oof. Death is an illusion, says RB. Yeah, it does seem to be, doesn't it? Don't ever come across anybody who remembers dying or doesn't remember being alive. You let me know if you do at some point. Ooh, Y2K. There's a term I haven't heard in a while. Yeah, that really had people's feathers in a ruffle back in 1999. I recall that. That was back when Jesse Ventura won the governorship of Minnesota. And then we haven't seen wrestlers in political office since. I can't imagine why. Or have we? Okay, I'll stop being ornery. But anyways, we don't really know how long each of these eras are, because if you look at this, we're talking about all the guesswork we have to verify if a tower in Kansas City was built in the 1920s. We don't even know for sure if a famous actor was on a particular ship in World War II in 1941, a very well documented event in the most famous battle for the United States. Anyways, so when was this reset event? Well, some people think they know, and they have very good theories behind it. And they say, it's around every 100 years, or other people say, for all we know, there could be a reset every other second. We really don't know. But what we're looking at here when we explore these 5 eras theory is this is one way to look at this and to gain an understanding. Now, the other question I've been asked is, how do you know there's 5 eras? I don't. It's a guess. It's a theory. There might be 10 eras, or maybe there really is just one era. And all the reset events are just something that kind of restart us at a certain point, but they're not really a hard break, and they don't really change the actual nature of the land, the nature of the society. We lose all of our history. Or, like the ending of the reimagined Battlestar Galactica. Although, let's be honest, that was just a certain creator's dive into nihilism. So thoughts initially on the 5 eras theory. Do you think it's a good way to look at things, or do we need to step back and reevaluate or revise how we look at the past? Because what we're going to do is try to figure out how many years may have been in each of these eras. And yes, in this exploration, I'm going to give you my best guess. And that's exactly what it is. It is a guess. It is speculation. I'm saying it. And don't worry, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people in the comments when they watch this later that'll say, speculation, where are the facts? Give me answers. No, not yet, but I'll be getting to it since you've asked. Thanks for your patience. Does the first era begin at the last global catastrophic event? No, I think there's something before it, but we're going to get into each of them. So, reverse 1 and 2. Yeah, that could be possible. That could be possible. Sissy May, 250 years. Old World Hastings. I wonder if we should narrow our focus to just more recent history. Everything before 150 years ago or so is thick, milky. Well, true. But what isn't? Do we have to make some speculations? Is there a point to make assumptions? But should we remember that they're assumptions and keep open minds? That's one of the hardest things to do. Oh, New West Reset. Maybe Jason Robards is lying the same as when Brian Williams lied about taking fire on a chopper during the Iraq War. Yeah, it is really odd, isn't it? And what's even more odd to me, New West Reset, is the fact that that was on a documentary and they even showed all these Pearl Harbor veterans. You would think that one of them would say, hey, Jason Robards wasn't on the Honolulu. I mean, this is only 50 years after the fact. Plenty of them are still alive. But I mean, it's one of those really bizarre things. That's a good point, though. Anyway, so we are going to begin by looking at the fifth era. So one moment, please. And we're going to switch out, and we've got a really, really great picture to start the fifth era with. And I know it's just really going to knock your socks off. Ready? Here we go. Ah, yes. The wondrous architecture of the pencil skyscraper of the fifth era. Of course, those of you with sharp eyes will notice that there are some old world buildings in this particular image. Ah, yes. RB, I like timelines. I'm just bad at conceptualizing time. You know what, RB? Maybe we all are. I am, we all are. It's hard for us to conceptualize it. And maybe there's a reason for that. Robert, when were the Anunnaki? Well, since you're asking, I would suggest either the first or the second era, maybe the first two eras, but maybe they didn't happen the exact way that we think of them. See, that's the beauty of this five eras theory, is it doesn't really discount anything. We don't discount the Anunnaki. We don't discount the MRC. We don't discount preterism. We don't discount many other things. So, Adam, I hate the pencil skyscraper. It looks like it's going to fall. Yeah, it doesn't exactly give you the confidence of something that's going to last for, 100 to 500 years or, even the next 10 to 20. But who knows the reality behind it. So, But this is what we associate with the fifth era. This is what we see our modern cities. Tall glass and steel skyscrapers. And it still takes us about 4 to 5 years to bang them out. You don't really hear of any one-year wonders anymore, but they're taller, I guess. Now, does anybody know where this is? And I'll give you a hint. This is not, I say again, not in the Middle East anywhere. Is there anybody out there who knows where this is? And no, I'm not expecting the Kansas City residents to know this one. So, well, you're not far off there, Lawrence of Olivia. You're not too far away from it. It's not Vegas. You're close, though. Geographically, or whatever that is, you're close. Godzilla stripper pole. Oh, that's a great one, RB. Oh, Julius. Yeah, it's not far from Hollywood. This is actually in the great city of Los Angeles. And you might remember there was a film that we reviewed back when I was doing Old World in Film. Yeah, it's in Los Angeles. And this was actually inspired from the movie set of the film Intolerance, a film from the 19 teens. And what they tell us is that they reconstructed this entire movie set. Although when you look at images of the movie set, you'll notice that the elephants look exactly the same. The symbols look exactly the same. So yeah, they still have this setting up here in this shopping center, this very bizarre Mesopotamian symbol in the middle of Los Angeles. And you might recall they also had that tire factory that's really close there. And that's been covered. So yeah, if you need any confirmation that you're in Los Angeles, look right in front of you. That'll give you the confirmation. I recall when I was there, they had a big, huge statue of a mummy because they were advertising that the Tom Cruise film that I didn't enjoy very much. I'm not saying it's a bad film. I just didn't enjoy it very much, but very interesting. So is this some sort of remnant? Is it something else? I don't know. I didn't analyze it. I didn't really want to go close to it. There was some reason I wasn't drawn to that when I was in Los Angeles. And so specifically in the contemporary era, so we're exploring everything right now, our modern cities and all the remnants that we have of the fourth era. Now, if you go off of this five eras theory timeline, what happens is you go back further in time. You're going to have fewer remnants of the buildings and the structures that came before with the passage of time, and then whatever destruction or destructive forces occurred in each of these reset events. However, is it possible, though, that because the structures in the distant past were of a much greater scale, were larger beyond our ability to comprehend, that there could actually be more remnants than we realize from the foundation eras. That's something to keep in mind. But we'll stay in the fifth era for right now. And indeed, all these images that we have, a good question posed by Vaughn, were these pictures actually taken in the fifth era? I believe the majority of them were, but I could be wrong. Some of them could have been remaining photos from things going bad during the end of the fourth era, for all we know. But you tend to get this image. You have these more advanced buildings, even small towns and cities, that seem to show architectural prowess beyond our ability to do today, even with all of our great advanced heavy machinery. And let's not forget our logistical capacity that they did not have, according to official history, in the 1800s. We have the modern highway system, we have the interstates, depending on what you call it, where you live. But then you see these horses and all this other how do we say, conflict in terms of technology, contradicting accounts, even in the image itself. But that's what we tend to get when we look at the fifth era. Oh, here you go, Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. This is where they had the grand review of the armies after the Civil War. You can actually see them walking and marching, I should say, and then doing their hard turn right here. And then, of course, the stands. Quite a photo it is. But, was this something, again, from the fifth era? I think most of these photos are, and this is when they were repopulating. But what are your thoughts? Ah, there you go, Lawrence. They had really good horses and wagons. They were all master chiselers and hammerers. You're right. All artisans. And we don't even need to talk about logistics, because we can just say that, yes, they were able to do it. It was no problem. Yeah, exactly. Building ornate palaces. Just try, because everybody was an artisan. Seems to be what they tend to tell us. But we do a lot of our studies, a lot of our explorations on this time frame, because there are hints and there are clues. Now, whatever the actual veracity of those photos, and that is something that we need to take into account, because they may be accurate, they may not be accurate. Oh, this is a good one. This is actually from New York City, where you have somebody in the basement that's actually doing what we would call a health and welfare check today. Yeah, looks like some pretty healthy conditions. Definitely makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? And then, of course, no shortage of these incredible photos. This is the Empire State Building. At least that's what they tell us. This worker is just dangling off and doesn't seem to have a care in the world. I can't imagine why. Why is he wearing, it looks to be a bellhop hat? I don't know. Maybe I'm just seeing that. Nice gloves, though. And he's got a nice big spanner right there as he's working on that. And you can see the Chrysler Building there. Although, do you see any issues with this photo? I don't know. But we have these photos, no shortage of these kind of photos with these super workers that are going up there at death-defying heights. And you'll have people that'll tell you, well, they just worked harder then. Not only were they master artisans and craftsmen, they could suddenly build a whole new style, Art Deco, which they hadn't built before. So I guess they could master new arts and crafts instantly. And never mind the logistical signature of building buildings like this. I mean, yes, there's video of the Empire State Building going up, but is it continuous video of every single day and it's sped up or slowed down? No, but make of it what you will, as I'm fond of saying. But this is what you'll get. And then, of course, you have these kind of images where you see massive rubble and destruction, but then you got just a couple horse wagons. Very interesting, huh? Ah, airship photo with Guy Leerdon. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I'm Kairos. That's a very good way to put it. Oh, thank you for that, Vaughn. I appreciate that. So thank you, Vaughn, and welcome to the new members. And that's for everybody who joined, and then the people who just joined off of Vaughn's generous gift. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. But you'll see that when you look at these eras and you look at what is really being shown to you, No, those are perfect wheels. I mean, could you imagine taking those wheels through lots of mud and rubble? No problem. Just get a strong enough horse, right? It's really that simple. But that's what we tend to see, those conflicts. And then cities that seem to be ridiculously populated. This is Vienna in Austria. We've looked at this before. Here's that lovely plague column they have. And of course, I'm being facetious. I would never say that any memorial dedicated to the death of many, many people is lovely. But, artistically, it's very pretty to look at. The intention behind it's what I disagree with. But who knows? Who knows what it really represents and what it really signifies. And then here in Denmark, and you might recall we looked at this little object here when we were looking at symbols of Tartaria on this tower. Recently, something else that came up to a fire. So yeah, Denmark's got it too. And then New York City again with some of the incredible buildings on the skyline in the distant past. We've got domes. We've got very ornate towers. Yes, nobody's building like this today. Oh, look, looks like we've got another mausoleum of Helicanarsis over here because, you just can't get enough of those. But, recalling the Singer building and then what happened to the majority of these structures. Well, some of them survived, but a lot of the rest of them, unfortunately, like the Singer building, were torn down. The old World building, that was torn down too. Urban renewal, we got to make space. Now we've got cars. But the skyline was very impressive. And, early 1900s, I think this photo is attributed to 1910, but, I don't know for sure. I wasn't there. I didn't take it. It's very pretty, even with the dust and the monochromatic appearance to it. Yeah, there you go, Old World Hastings, all built in a very short amount of time. And that's exactly what you'll get with it, too. Yeah, I know, Sean. I mean, it would have been amazing to see it live action at that time. Hmm. And then images such as Paris. And we've looked at Paris very recently, and, no shortage of old world buildings there, very incredible structures. But then you have these people just going around on their horse and buggy. So really, it looked the same, or horse and cart, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, you got these destruction images, the original City Hall in San Francisco after that nasty earthquake. Although, oddly enough, there's accounts of the army actually creating fire breaks, and they created fire breaks by destroying buildings. So, what was actually going on? Who knows? There was all kinds of destruction happening. There was an earthquake, there were fires, there were fire breaks, there was intentional, unintentional destruction of buildings. Is this a real image? Does this really reflect what this building actually looked like, or is it something else? I don't know. Like the palm trees, though. Of course, you got to have the palm trees. And oddly enough, just rubble all over the place. And so these are the images that we get of the Fifth Era. Clearly images that were taken from the Fifth Era. Oh, and now we go to Sweden. Yes, I intend to get up to Sweden here soon, the Nordic nations as they were, and especially explore some of the islands that they've inhabited. And you might recall we highlighted the fact that the Norwegians were the great polar explorers. They explored the North Pole and the South Pole. Now, yeah, they're geographically close to the North Pole, but certainly not the South Pole. But by golly, if you're going to do one, you better do both. Anyways, but they've got the same thing going on in their cities, massive towers, very impressive structure and architecture, and again, defying logistical limitations that we would expect for that time. Somehow they found a way around it if we go off the official history. And then Switzerland. I haven't explored Switzerland much yet either. That's on the near-term list. Don't worry, I've got some other promised explorations that are coming up soon. But when you look a little bit more closely, you'll see they've got the same thing there. Very developed structures. But, it's Europe. They had the time to do it. They were settled for hundreds or thousands of years, and that just makes sense. They didn't have the same limitations. Although the Industrial Revolution apparently happened at the same time. And then those upstart Americans got ahead because they developed the railroad faster. That's what the official history says, if you recall the exploration earlier this week. Another view of Paris, and very interesting down here. Hard to say what's going on in this photo, but again, you see all the extensive structures. Now, were these all built in the 1800s? Is the official history correct? I always keep that on the table. But do I find it likely that it is? No. And in fact, with every subsequent exploration, I find it less and less likely that that's what happened. Yeah, I could see that too. Well, exactly, Vaughn, the infrastructure under it. I mean, there's catacombs that are under Paris. We've talked about it and we've explored them. So, oh, here's a good question. The Wind. Do you think the people that were alive then appreciated these buildings like we appreciate them now, even though we cannot see them? Here's a way to answer this question. How many of us, myself included, walked in, through, and around these buildings every day for our lives and did not appreciate them? I'm going to admit it. I did it for many years in my life. I walked in and out of that Iowa State Capitol and never thought there was anything special about it. It's just a state capitol. Yeah, it's pretty, but there's nothing extraordinary about it. There's nothing just otherworldly about it. So I think that for the most part, if there was anybody who still had some sort of memory or thought something, we know what happened to them, especially if they asked the wrong questions. Again, if you follow me. Yes, and then these watermarks that we have, all these aerials or these bird's eye view photos that we have. This is New York City, again from the 1800s, the early 1800s even, although who knows how accurate it is. I mean, anybody can do a drawing at any time. But is it any more accurate than a photo? Oh, I don't know. It's all a lot of guesswork, especially when you consider how shall we say, compressed Manhattan Island has always been. Yet, oddly enough, when you look at it, it gives you the hint that there were some more advanced things going on, even as early as 1812. Ah, yes, that nasty war. That war that the United States military didn't do so well in. Probably why they didn't ever want to try to invade Canada again. They finally had enough of that. But then you have these other odd images from New York, 1842, this water reservoir. Now, did this really exist or didn't it? I don't know. There are actual remnants, though, and there are hints that this reservoir did really exist. Quite an advanced structure for the early, or maybe I should say the mid 1800s, but even so, just incredible building, incredible architecture, and again, defying the logistical limitations. And who knows what's going on in the background here? Maybe you could say that's artistic impression or artistic expression. But who knows for sure? It's really, really odd. Mm. Oh, nothing to be sorry about, New West Reset. I mean, it's one of those funny stories, you know. You talk about how the United States military wanted to rely on its militia, and then its militia refused to cross the border into Canada. But that wasn't the last time, you know. We also talked about those Fenian raids that occurred after the United States Civil War. Apparently, those didn't go well either, but, you know, make of it what you will. Ooh. Hollis, could it be that the precession didn't reel and the shift of the dome means a different dimension shift in recent years? That's entirely possible too. Can't rule that out. Oh, that's a good one there, Texas. Giant swimming pool. Yeah. That'd probably make more sense than anything else we've got. And then, of course, no shortage of all the great city fires that occurred mostly in the 1800s, although there are notable exceptions, such as the Great London Fire of 1666. But remember, Doctor Who was an alien that caused that, so maybe that's more credible. I don't know. But that's what we have. And then, of course, we have other impressive images that show us what New York City looked like in the 1800s. And that's what we're exploring: photos, paintings, bird's eye views. And then, oddly enough, some of these other impressive images. This is the Broadway Tabernacle in New York, circa 1847. Again, make of that what you will. Look at the size of these columns here, if this was real, if this did exist as they show us. And of course, it's got a nice big organ in it. I wonder how much it is similar to the tabernacle that still stands to this day in Salt Lake City. And you'll see that they've got the decorated columns here. I mean, what a building this must have been to go into. And I'm under the impression that, yes, it did exist. And I think the fact that there is still that tabernacle in Salt Lake City does give credence to the fact that this building did one point exist. So that's all we've got for the fifth era. And that's where most of our explorations take place. Sissy, I'd hate to know how many birds flew over that giant pool. Oh, that's a good one. Craters. Sound resonance. Yes. Probably very much in that structure too. All right. So with that, please hit the like button. And I appreciate everyone being here. We're going to go on a little bit of a break before we transition to more of the speculation, and we go back to the fourth era before the last hard reset, at least what we suspect to be the last hard reset. So hit that like button. We'll take a look at the fourth era, and we'll talk about that reset a little bit. So with that, we'll be right back in 2 minutes, and I've improved the intermission music, or maybe I haven't. You let me know what you think in the comments. Be back in 2 minutes. Okay, thoughts on the new intermission music. I know it's so important and all. Oh, well, there we go. Deep state music. Oh, goodness, Albie. I hope you're not saying deep state, but all right. So we're going to transition to the fourth era. Give everybody a chance to get back on from the break. So, one moment. And we'll close out the fifth era, and now we go to the fourth era. Now, the fourth era, yes, I get a lot of requests to do fourth era explorations. And the fourth era is probably most compelling because guess what? In this fourth era, we have the most evidence that remains, do we not? Hey, New West Reset, thank you for that. I appreciate it very much. Yeah, happy little bricks, no doubt about it. Hey, Atom Bomb. Oh, well, thanks. So, anyways, when we look at the fourth era, what was the reset event? Well, we've got different theories behind it. Was it a plasma fire? Was it some kind of flood? Was it some sort of event that caused all these cities to actually go up in smoke at the same time? Was it a combination of things? Was there some sort of external force that tore apart the civilization, but then tore it apart from the inside and the outside? We've explored all those ideas and we've looked at all of them. And then after this defeat, then what remained was destroyed by a hard reset event. Now, was that something that was contrived, or was it something that was a natural event that somebody who understood a grander chronological calendar than we could ever begin to imagine knew about? We just don't know. But the fourth era tends to be what we spend most of our time exploring because we do have what we assess to be the most evidence remaining from the fourth era. Kathy, all the above. Probably right, because there's evidence of all the above at various times. Well, reality, Fallout actually considers many of these theories, and even the original game of Fallout did back in the late 90s when the first games came out, Fallout 1 and Fallout 2. Still my favorite. So, yeah, I'm with you, Jamie. A combination beyond any shadow of doubt. But so, what did it really look like in the fourth era? Well, maybe the best hint that we have, or the best clue, is what some of the grand expositions that we've explored looked like. Maybe these were the best preserved remnants of the structures that survived, fully intact for all we know. Now, of course, we understand that our official history tells us that is not the case. These were all temporary structures that were built by some form of plaster and somehow managed to stand up through terrifying windy conditions in Chicago, and San Francisco can get a little windy, although the weather there is usually pretty temperate. And, they managed to stand while they were needed, and they looked in perfect pristine condition. And then as soon as they were done with them, they all fell down or were torn down. That's what they tell us. Now, in recent time, and I want to address this, there has been a little bit more of a, how shall we say, I don't want to say mainstream response. I'll just say perhaps there's been a little bit more of an acknowledgement from certain individuals within the mainstream. And oddly enough, this has been a very recent occurrence, over the last year, the last 2 years, where it seems as though they might be recognizing these things. Now, of course, that's happened in the past, and, the 1970s, 1980s. I know because I saw this stuff firsthand. And then all of a sudden it was very quietly and carefully shut down. Now, it wasn't directly shut down. It was simply ignored and ridiculed, and that tends to be the most effective. But many different images about what things looked like in the fourth era. And remember, it's all very hypothetical. I think that the best clue we have is these expositions. But maybe not. Maybe it was much more grandiose for all we know. Or maybe there was an element of it, and I have considered it, a dystopian element, because remember, this civilization fell and it collapsed. So perhaps the leadership was subverted, perhaps they were corrupted by this external force or this ancient enemy. We've done these explorations, and they turned the civilization against itself. and things started to get really bad really fast. Very dense living conditions, things that don't really make a lot of sense. But then we have other images, and yes, I'm using all resources here, so just bear with me, that give us the impression that when things were at their height, it was quite an amazing experience. You had unlimited travel capacity. You had the logistical ability to construct these structures. You still had more advanced technology. And then on the other hand, you also had the balance between the individual and the civilization, one not taking advantage of another. And also consider the leadership before it was corrupted, a responsible leadership that actually took their leadership seriously. And it was not something to be exploited. I am certainly not suggesting that anyone has ever done this in the fifth era, merely that it was a point of emphasis in the fourth era. Yes. I've also seen some images of a 10-story tall hillside temple with terrifying animal heads. Yeah. And you'll see many of these different details. So maybe they cared more about beautiful architecture and pleasurable travel than money and power. Well, that's just it. Different values, a civilization and a society that operated completely different than what we understand. Now, you might recall when we did the exploration on the concept of utopia, which is, of course, utilizing our modern software to try to conceptualize some more dramatic images. Of course, on the other hand, are these images real? Well, no, officially they are not. They are fabricated images. But whether it's artwork or images, it could give you an idea of what something may have looked like. And then, of course, there's other images. And could there have been the remnants of structures from the previous eras in the fourth era? That is possible. Or perhaps they were inspired at some point in time. But was there a concept of free energy, or was there a concept of multiple forms of energy production that were more advanced beyond anything we can imagine? Absolutely. Crystal energy, energy from the air, other forms of energy, not reliant on what we think of as energy today. In reality, one of the components of the theory of the five eras theory is that as you go further back in time, capability increases. The logistical capability increases. The artistic expression of the civilization increases. And ultimately, the size and eminence and beauty of the buildings increases. Again, it's just a theory. It could all be wrong, and I acknowledge it. But some of the images giving you an idea of what it may have looked like or what it could have looked like. Now, is it possible? Again, this is another one of these, what we're informed are generated images. Is it possible that there was something like this that was visible in this way to the people after the reset? What did they really know? Were they just brought back on the boats and cut loose and told to make the best that they could with what they had? Sure. And were there authority figures who were told what the account was? Sure. And did they question things? Well, what tends to happen when you question things? Yeah, nothing good. But that's what we have from it. And I thought I would include this little image from the film The Golden Compass, because a couple people had mentioned that on comments, and I thought they did a pretty good job of giving what a representation may have been of that civilization. And of course, they show the different structures and different buildings here, but imagine being in a civilization like that. What it would really allude to, what it would really be like. Yeah, he's attributed to have said that, but did he actually say that, Albie? That's the hard thing to realize. I think there's a lot more of a complicated account with that particular individual than we understand. Jamie, what happens when you put a crystal under pressure? You get a lot of energy. And you might recall we do have some very interesting deposits of crystal all over the place. Need to explore that again. Vaughn, maybe higher level of being in balance with the environment. Yes. That's a good comment there, Vaughn, because as you go further back in time, you see that as well. Atom bomb, energy through vibration. Absolutely. An understanding of all the different things that they could do and what their capabilities really were. RB, animals have all the resources they need. Why shouldn't it be the same for us? What a wonderful, wonderful observation there, RB. You are absolutely right. Why shouldn't it be the same for us? Why shouldn't it be the same for us indeed? And at that point in time, if you had a better balance and if you had the ability to produce all the energy that you needed, then you also have to think of how life was different at that point in time. Were people working 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, or 70 hours a week, 100 hours a week? Or did they have a little bit more of a balanced lifestyle? Did they actually have a role within the civilization that they fell into because of their natural talents and or desires? Or is it just a utopia nightmare? Is that what happened? All these things are possible. I don't know. A lot of people have given me a lot of criticism about even suggesting the idea because I'm well aware that any sort of society that lives in balance, you notice I never say egalitarian. Not once have I ever suggested it's an egalitarian society. And not once have I ever said it's a superior society or civilization. I have never, ever said that. But of course, people out there try to attribute that. So just correcting that. And then, of course, the great works of Benjamin Sachs, an artist. And I think he really, for whatever reason, whether it's divine inspiration in his mind or just having some sort of connection to it, I think that in a lot of his artwork, he probably captured what these cities may well have looked like. With all the domes, the fine geographical precision that you have of the streets. And you can still see this today with cities such as Paris. In some cities, it's more present than others, where you have this impressive geographical layout. And then you even have these very built up structures that still endure to this day. And I think there's a lot of indications that's exactly what the civilization had ascended to. Kitsch, maybe they just work together for the whole. It's amazing what we can do when we're not intoxicated with nostalgia or fighting over politics. Very good points. Yes, living in the moment and actually living for the dreams of tomorrow. Ooh, Jay, kinetic energy collection. Yeah, that's a good one too. Kinetic energy. Kathy, yeah, circuit board cities. And maybe this is where it all came from. And maybe they had something that there were larger scale machines or gigantic apparatus, if you will, that were all part of these circuit board cities for all we know. Hey, Clara. Sky, for me, the devil is never a negative figure. Ooh, interesting. KC933, did they even need food? Perhaps they did. Perhaps they had more efficient food, more efficient processes. They didn't need to eat as much food. And therefore, they didn't need to relieve themselves as much. And maybe that's why we don't see so many bathrooms. Who knows for sure? But then, of course, other images of what the fourth era may have looked like. And did we see the remnants of it with all the tall buildings that had the ability to dock airships to? And of course, there's people who say they know the capabilities of airships because they knew somebody who saw an airship back in 1929 and that they saw what its capabilities were from the ground. How exactly you know the capabilities of any airship from the ground, watching it fly over, I don't know, but that's what we call a third or a fourth hand account. Not a lot of credibility, but. And then, of course, consider what we do see that made it to us from a place such as New York City. And when you look at it with those kind of eyes and that kind of understanding, then suddenly things like the Singer Building, they make a lot more sense. Or does it make more sense if you just accept the fact that, well, yeah, in the 1800s, in the middle of New York City, they just started building skyscrapers as the Industrial Revolution, and it was that easy. No problem. And that's why we have that very vague timeline on the development of heavy machinery. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Yeah, what's the good question I missed? Hate it when I miss a good question. Oh, Adam, what is red mercury? We'll get to that. I've got an exploration of that coming soon, Adam. Coming very, very soon. Don't let me forget either. Feels like the tide is shifting back to the collective instead of a pyramid. Maybe, maybe not, RB. I guess we'll find out. So anyway, we'll transition now. I think this is the last image that I had. Oh, no, wait. I still had some of the Eutropia images. Now, what's interesting about the Eutropia images is while they are fabricated, there is a little bit of an element of reality into them. In other words, they're not completely going outside the bounds of what may or may not be possible because, oddly enough, they do combine a lot of things that were possible. We've certainly seen all the window ornamentations, the arches, the columns. The only thing that's different with the Eutropia is that they tend to take it to a much grander scale. But did they have that capability at some point in the past? They may well have. And even looking at places such as in East Asia and looking at the great Buddhist temples there, and we'll be exploring those again too. Is this an energy generator? Is it something else entirely? May all be for all we know. And then even some of the other images, where you might see a little bit more of a dystopian nature. Is that when the conflict started to go against the fourth era civilization and things started to fall apart? All things we have to realize. Okay, now I don't want to forget. I told you I was going to give you my assessment on how long each of these eras were. And as we go into the third era, I'm going to tell you how long I think the fourth era was. Now, keep in mind, it's a guess, and that's all it really is. So let's go to the third era. One moment. And let me get those images real quick. And here we go. So, the contemporary era. Best guess, and again, guess, speculation. Thinking that the reset occurred between the fourth and the fifth era sometime between 1800 to 1850. That's the guess, based on the significant events, based on things being very ambiguous the further back you go. But how long was the actual fourth era? Anywhere from, I would say, 20 to 25,000 years. That would be my guess. And again, who knows? Is it what we think of as years, or is it on a completely different timeline? I don't like assigning years to it, but it had to be something that lasted a very long time. It had to be something that came up after a reset from the third era. And this is why any sort of accounts of the third era, I think, become very problematic. I mean, you were talking about such a long period of time, and I just throw that out there. Just think of how long tens of thousands of years are. Of course, nobody ever thinks about that. They just think, well, the scientists told us, a couple million years ago, or Cro-Magnons developed 30,000 years ago. Modern humans developed about the same time frame. Of course, it depends what day you ask the question. How long ago was it? How long ago is tens of thousands of years? Is there evidence that human beings have been around that long? Yes, but do people question the evidence? Yes. And are they constantly at each other's throats about the evidence? Absolutely. But an entire civilization, for all we know, it could have been even 100,000 years. So that's what I said. It's pure speculation or guess. So minimum of 25,000, maximum of 100,000, with a caveat that it could have been a million for all we know. I mean, you just don't know. We don't even know what ship Jason Robards was on not 80 years ago. So, you see why this gets problematic. So now the third era. The third era, the civilization that preceded the Tartarian era or the Monument era. The Star Fort builders, as I like to call them. And everywhere across the land, to include Australia, many places in Australia. And yes, I will be exploring Australia soon. They do have these geometrically precise foundation structures, as I called star forts. Although, what are we really seeing of the star forts? Are we just seeing the bare bones remnants of them? Well, we do get the inclination that the architecture was factored into the land and the natural environment a lot more effectively in the past. That's what always made it so interesting, I think. Yeah, Sky Sage says it best, and I know nothing either. So, anyway, let me change my banner here. We're in the third era now. Keep up, Erlene, keep up. All these humanoids flying around in orbs, which era are they from? Good question. I honestly don't know. Maybe they could be from the first or the second era for all we know. Jeff 6, generator design. Yeah, a lot of inclinations of that. That again, it was a massive apparatus that, some people think of the star forts as actually being components of a much larger machine that covered entire landscapes. Again, going up in a larger scale of creation and design. I love it when people claim things are as the official dome claims. Oh, yeah. Well, it's the path of least resistance, Sean. So, atom bomb. Humans perceived 100 years as a long time and treat a million years as a number. Absolutely correct. Absolutely right. It's kind of funny with that, isn't it? And so when we see these star forts, and I've had people claiming to be pirates who got really upset about the fact that I suggested the fact that star forts were actually from a previous civilization and not the product of some French military architect genius who neglected to put one around Paris. So make of it what you will. But there's many different examples, and they're all over the place. There's even the star fort in Japan that we looked at, quite interestingly enough. And so what are the odds of that? Of course, they just sent an engineer over there, or they had a genius who went to Europe and studied it. That's what the official story will say. Of course, when you look at the account of Japan's entry into the 1800s world of politics, It's a little problematic. It really makes you wonder what was going on. But yep, they had star forts there too. And then, of course, the very impressive star fort in Italy. There are many of them. And you might remember the name of this particular town. It starts with a P, and I've explored it before. And then, how far did this really go? What did this really look like at the extent of their building capabilities? And here we're talking about buildings that completely defy our imagination with that kind of geometric precision. Because look at what remains on the ground and now add the vertical component to that. How high and how far could they have built? Is this where we see all these obelisks that still remain? And what were they actually constructed out of? Well, that we don't know. Now, remember, this is just a hypothetical artistic image, but the remains are still on the ground. You can't just simply discount that. Yeah, I'm with you, reality check, man. I want to see what's underneath too. So, Vaughn, did the Fallen terraform these palaces? There's probably a high potential for that, or at least what we think of as the Fallen. So, RB, Star Fort, Star Cities, beyond my current human comprehension. That's probably the best way to say it, too. Very much the best way to say it. But then, of course, on the note of star cities, like such as the plan of New Orleans, we can see that the original plan of New Orleans, it was a star city. It was not just one of those isolated star forts that we explored there. And there are multiple plans that show that. And of course, there's towns and cities that show you how extensive this was. And so this does give you the impression that this was a lot more advanced. Oh, it's for defensive purposes. Cannons, cannons, cannons. Okay. But, one of the things that people neglect is that to have effective defenses, from what we're told was going on at that time, according to the mainstream historical account, you needed to have defenders to man all these walls. Otherwise, they're just obstacles to be bypassed. And there's a saying in the military, if you have an obstacle that's undefended, it's not really an obstacle, is it? Might delay them, but that's all it'll achieve. And then, of course, there's all these accounts of how these cities actually look. Now, are these accurate, or are these just as fictitious as some of these images that we've looked at? Don't know. By the way, another good question. How exactly did they get an aerial of this? Was someone else jumping in balloons in the 1600s? I don't know. Oh, and I don't want to forget Frankfurt in Germany, because they had a nice star city on both sides of the river. Because why wouldn't you? But yes, that encompasses the third era. Now you'll probably ask, well, why don't we spend more time on the third era? Because it's very difficult to have any idea what was actually happening then. We don't know for sure what was going on in the third era. Do we have any sort of accounts? Well, if we do, they're myth and they're legend. Atom bomb, our star fort's launch pads built by the ones left behind. Well, that's possible too. All possibilities are on the table. Can't discount anything. Is in the middle of the Star City really the unification of the underworld? Well, there could be portals to it as well, Clara. We just don't know, but there are indications. So, all right. So that's why things get a lot more vague when we go to these earlier eras. So we're going to go to the second era now. And now we're really going back into the times of legend and myth. And do they get more interesting? Do they have more incredible possibilities to them? Perhaps they do. Now, I'm going to suggest something that's a little controversial here, and that's okay, and you're welcome to disagree with me. But I'm under the impression that the Great Pyramids that we see, now, let me be clear here. I'm not talking about the remnants of the pyramids that we still have on the land today, whether you're talking Egypt or Sudan or whatever. I'm talking about the possibility of the pyramids that were incredibly large. They may have existed. That's what we're talking about with the second era. Because remember, we're going back before the Star Fort builders. So they would be even more advanced. So what they would have left is they would have left that building impression, that design impression, but they were the actual masters of it, building at a level and a scale we can't even begin to imagine. Where you're talking about buildings that could be confused for hills or the remnants out there. Well, maybe that's what we're looking at with the pyramids and these greater pyramids that we talk about. Now, it's very controversial to even suggest this, I know. And I know that we're assured by our experts out there, geologists, scientists, historians, that this never happened. So, of course, I'm reflecting the mainstream account. Take it with your own belief system. Come to your own conclusions. Is it possible that they had once built buildings like this that were this large? Thoughts? What do you think? Oh boy, I got to get caught up here. Hmm. hmm. Ah, Jamie, yes, some in Indonesia. Great examples there, no doubt about it. Ah, it's like the fifth element. uh, I am Kairos. Yes, they are melted mountains. Yeah, Dune with Transformers. Oh, that's a good one. Space Fraggle. Earth is 4 billion years old. It is very possible. Yeah, Sean, and maybe that's what those previous civilizations really were. Who knows? Maybe they came in the very distant past. We just don't know. But just think on that, a structure like this that we think of as a pyramid or a bit of an amalgamation here between a pyramid and an obelisk. Now, granted, it's an artistic rendering, but it is possible. And think of this, think of pyramid structures that had more extensive capabilities, acted as portals. Think of how far the civilization really went. Because the other component of the theory is that as you go further back in time, they had greater capabilities. Were they human beings? Maybe. Were they more advanced human beings in the past? Maybe. Would we think of them now as angels or the Nephilim, but they were actually human beings? It's all possible. But of course, I don't want to take those accounts off the table either because maybe they did happen as they're relayed to us. We just don't know. We're considering different possibilities, and that's what we're focused on right now. Now, how far could this have gone? What could this have really looked like? I mean, is this just some science fiction fantasy here? Possible. Is this something that might look like an alien world to us in the distant past? Oh, yeah. By the way, on the note of science fiction fantasy, you might notice that one thing you won't see in a lot of intellectual properties is this idea that there was a advanced civilization in the distant past. In fact, one of the few examples you can find is Highlander 2, the Renegade Edition, not to be confused with Highlander 2, the Quickening, because in Highlander 2, the Renegade Edition, they changed the plot from the immortals being aliens to being from the distant past, because the producers realized they made a horrifying mistake when they said they were aliens and answered a question nobody asked. But, Clancy Brown tells the story behind those two guys. Now, is it also possible that after the reset of the Second Era, that there were ruins like this that remained for a long period of time? Yes, it's very possible. Oh, yeah, the old Stargate doors. That's a good one. KC933, the fact that we call them tombs just irritates me. Well, tombs and temples, that's kind of how we describe everything. Ah, yes, Space Fraggle, the Kurgan. Very appropriate by the guy with the face of Commander Krug there, too, right? uh, Lori, yeah, I saw those, and I think there are 3 copies. Interesting. Very interesting. But is there something that looks like this today? Well, you might be surprised to know that there is. And how far did they go with this incredible pyramid building technology? We don't know. And were there other variations of it? Did they also build giant obelisks along with the pyramids? Well, that's a possibility too. And even having more of a circular base to them, where we see the circular cities, such as in the Middle East. Could that possibly explain that? Because the geometric precision is just as visible there. It's a variation, but is there a reason that some areas of the land have different levels of surviving technology than others? Always a question to ask. And then also consider the other dimensions behind this. If they'd really achieved portal technology, perhaps they even managed to bend what we think of as the nature of reality itself. There's a lot of indications that the technology had reached this level. Now, did it really happen, or is it just science fiction? Well, where did all these science fiction ideas come from? Was Robert Heinlein just that kind of a visionary that he was able to understand a fourth dimensional existence? Or did someone else give him the idea? Hard to say for sure. And you see some of these other images that give you the idea of if you achieve a little bit more of a balance. And then, of course, the reset prior to the Second Era. And yes, we have a desiccated Tower of Babel here, but maybe that's the only way we can really understand what was actually in the first era. Although we're really going to legendary mythical status when we go to the first era. And, could it have been to the point where they were managed to explore other lands or access other lands? Whether you want to think of it as inner space, outer space, or some other reality. Yeah, they might well have achieved that kind of technological level for all we know. And I wasn't able to show it. I'm not going to show it just yet. But you may recall there are areas in China where they have pyramids that very much look like pyramids. Yes, 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 yes. But of course, we're informed that they are natural rock formations, aren't they always? So, with that, let us go to the most speculation and most hypothetical concept here with the first era. Now, this is really where we're going into myth and legend, and we have to because we don't really have an option. And how far back are we really going here? Well, now you can see why my whole confidence in any sort of timeline just goes right out the window because, was this 25,000 to 100,000 years? How long were each of these eras? Was the third era a couple 100,000 years? Was it a couple million years? Maybe. Was the very basis of the second era longer than that? Hundreds of millions of years. Maybe. Now that sounds completely fictitious and crazy, yet there are accounts from other religions of individuals living for millions of years. And you might recall when we looked at the immortality exploration, there were accounts that said that people lived that long. So is it possible that they came from the foundation eras? Or were they really, in fact, divine beings, as we're told they are? Both could be true at the same time. So we go to the first era, time unknown, the actual origin of all life. And is this what we would think of as an actual divine reign or a divine civilization? Maybe so. And there's different concepts and ideas of it. And even Game of Thrones touches on it in its origin story with the Golden Empire of the Dawn. But you're really looking at the actual pinnacle of what human beings were, or whatever they originally started as. You're looking at all those myths and everything that we have from the very baseline of religious stories from all societies and cultures all over the world. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Is it possible that the origin civilizations of Sumer and Babylon and the other legendary civilizations, Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, they all come from this time? That's possible. Or maybe they came from the subsequent eras. That's what we just don't know. It becomes very problematic to understand. Yeah, and do we see the remnants of these structures? Flintstones meet the Flintstones. Yeah, literally, RB. And do we see the remnants of these structures? And looks like I missed a gift. Thank you, New West Reset. I appreciate that. And welcome to the new members. Ah, Saxon Ranger reminds me of the Temple of the Golden Dawn. And thank you for bringing that up. I still have to do that occult exploration. I appreciate you reminding me of that. Yeah, Colossus sized everything. Now, again, it sounds like it might just be something that's just out in left field or science fiction. Oh, here it is. Here's the image from China that were informed officially by our experts that these are not artificial formations. These are natural rock formations. And as I'm always fond of saying, come to your own conclusions. And yes, we have some explorations of China coming in the near future. We'll see how they're received. You also have other random mountains. Now, some mountains do look natural. Some mountains don't. Could it be the effect of natural forces? Yes, it could be. But are there just a few too many coincidences? Just a few too many straight lines to ignore? Now, of course, people will tell you they know what happened because apparently they were there in the distant past, millions of years when they tell us these mountains formed. They can tell you exactly how they formed because millions of years ago they were there to see them, right? I know. I'll call Jason Robards. Oh, wait, he's not around. He can't tell me. Oh, I'll call Peter Weller. I'll see if I can get him mad at me again. That would be fun. But, you see what you see. And you can go and explore these natural formations. You can walk on them and you can come to your own conclusions. And yes, there's natural formations in Bosnia and the Balkans, all over the land. And yes, they're in Canada, they're in Australia. And you can go explore them and come to your own conclusions. Are they indeed natural? Or do they have the component of some sort of possibility of being some distant remnant of the very distant past? Don't know. But the possibilities are endless. Yeah, I hadn't meant to pick on Jason Robards' New West reset, but it being Pearl Harbor Day and all in the United States. Although it's funny, you don't really hear anybody mention Pearl Harbor Day so much anymore. I don't know. It seemed to have a lot more of a pull to it during the Cold War. I mean, they still do, but they just don't push it as much. So, not really sure. Oh, there you go, Angel Dreams. Well, could all just be a big coincidence for all we know. It could all just be a big coincidence. But then there's other more modern design plans that actually talk about having this kind of structure and these structures. So, did they just have inspiration? And then we've looked at these before. The most colossal structures that humans have ever envisioned, at least so we're informed. The Ultima Tower, 3,353 meters or 10,000 feet. The Tokyo Tower of Babel, 10,000 meters. Ah, yes. It's just a visionary project. Why would anybody even envision stuff like this? Well, because architects apparently have nothing better to do and they just envision great things. And maybe that is the truth. But it is rather odd where they get these ideas from. Why would you want to build these massive, colossal buildings unless they were some form of practical reality? That's what we just don't know. And how far did they get in the first era? Is it possible that the beings then we really would consider divine? Are these the beings that we consider supreme beings? I don't know. I know I'm going into controversial territory here. Is this where the origins of Olympus and all the other great beings and all the other great religions come across the land? Who knows for sure? Is that why we have so many? Again, I don't know. But it is rather interesting to think of that with the origins when you think of what could have been possible. Accounts of people living for millions of years. Well, maybe it was in the first era. So many possibilities. Human beings. That's a good one there, Hollis. No, Angel, I don't know a lot of people who do, especially once you've been around a little bit longer. Hmm. Heidi, the land was all connected. Yes. I think there's a lot of indications of that too, that the land was connected in the past. Hmm. Vaughn, always the blue beam. Yes. Different possibilities. And that's something else to think about, did they have the possibilities of terraforming? Could they change and control the very weather? Now, again, hypothetical conclusion. I'm not suggesting anything about it now. We won't talk about Operation Popeye today, but the possibility to control the weather, control the environment, to really be able to shape the natural environment while at the same time existing in balance. And then, of course, that old image that we have of the Tower of Babel. Was it actually constructed the way we're told, or was it a remnant from either the first or the second era that was still standing? And perhaps there was a different form of civilization before and after that reset. And maybe that story is recounting one of those resets. And many other explorers have talked about the fact that you have all the smaller buildings around it, indicating a lesser civilization. Trying to remember who first covered that. It's not important, but I think I recall John Levi talking about it back in the day. But then other images of what the Tower of Babel could have represented. How high did it go? Who knows? And is there something with the account of how humanity was united and speaking one language, and then afterwards the languages were confused on the basis of the story, which says who knows what they can accomplish? Well, maybe that really was what it was all about. And that's why we see so many variations of this. Now, is it possible somewhere out on the land that there's the remnants or the foundation structure of this building? Sure. Some people say it's in Canada. Some people say it's in Utah. Other people say it's in the Middle East. Could be anywhere, could be everywhere. There might have been multiple examples of the Tower of Babel. We just had the one story or the one myth that managed to survive to reach us. But maybe there were hundreds of them for all we know. And indeed, the remnants of the legendary First Era. Oh, yeah. Huge friggin' tower that everybody still talked about all this time. Oh, good one there, precision rifleman. Yeah, Pangea actually shifting the continents. Rather interesting idea there. So overall, I can't even give you a good estimate on the timeline of the eras because I don't believe that it's possible to get an exact idea of how many years came before. Because again, it all goes back to I don't know what ship Jason Robards was on in World War II. Yep, it all starts with that. That wasn't even 100 years ago. Sean P., the Beacon of Progress. Yep. And, was that a remnant from the end of the fourth era? Who knows how far they came in the fourth era? Would they have wanted to try to ascend to the heights of civilizations in the past? And the other question I get asked is, did the fourth era have a good idea of the first era? Well, I can tell you this, they probably had a better idea of the earlier eras than we do, but who knows for sure? Oh, yes, Sky Sage, terraforming is very real. You can even find that In Search Of episode when they were talking about the red planet and terraforming Mars. Now, of course, make of it what you will, but it's kind of interesting to think about that from the 70s and comparing it to today. Yes. Some kind of beehive. Yeah, maybe. Angel Dreams, maybe. Clara, Two Towers. Absolutely. Well, it could be the future, but will it be? I guess we'll find out. That's not going to happen. Look, I have a lot of respect for Peter Weller, all right? And he is a great actor. He's very intense. If you ever saw the film Screamers and when he says, "We are beached, we are betrayed," you know just how screwed they are. Nobody can deliver dramatic lines the way Peter Weller does. Too funny. All right. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this exploration looking at the different eras. And the real point I'm getting at is yes, we work a lot in theory. We have to. We have to make assumptions. We have to make speculations. Now, if you want to believe that the mainstream account is correct, if you want to believe that, yes, our civilization built all these buildings, the star forts, it was all just a military design, that's totally okay. Sissy May, who did the In Search Of series? That was Leonard Nimoy. He was the main host of it, although, as I understand it, he was not supposed to be the original host of it. You can also find Mysteries of the Gods with William Shatner. That's another interesting one. So they had all these programs from the 1970s. Again, a little bit of the time when the mainstream seemed to embrace the concept of alternative research and then very, very quietly and carefully turned away from it. So, oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about, but I think it's important to talk about because that tends to be the main theory that I often compare the explorations off of. But it's not the only theory. I'm simultaneously considering multiple theories. Well, you are most welcome. I appreciate that. Well, thank you, Kathy, and glad to see you as well. And before everybody departs, just be sure that you support the channel and hit that like button. And again, we've got another full schedule of explorations coming up this week. Probably do two. I might even do three. It depends how I'm feeling and how far we get into some of the on boots on the ground that I'm doing or on site. But as always, it was great to see everybody. Hit the like button, and we will see you again soon. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off. Thank you for joining us for live stream.